Here's a riddle. Which U.S. city is so loved that its name should be repeated twice? You guessed it, New York, New York. But the thing is, how much of New York do we really know? I'm talking about the city that lies under the city. Dare to join me on an underground tour of the Big Apple? Then grab a flashlight. It's about to get dark. We'll start in the heart of Manhattan, in the front of the Romanesque City Hall building. Believe it or not, beneath our feet lies New York's oldest subway station, known as the Old City Hall Station. It opened in 1904 on October 27th, a night of true celebration for New Yorkers. People were so excited, some of them spent the entire night riding the trains back and forth. Before this, urban dwellers moved around in carriages pulled by horses. No wonder the subway was such a hit. You might feel like a time traveler stepping inside the Old City Hall Station. The architecture is dazzling and one of a kind. They sure don't make subway stations like this one anymore. Fun fact, the Old City Hall Station would cost $6.2 million if it was built today. Back in the day, it had dozens of brass chandeliers hanging around. It was one of the few spots in town with functioning electricity. And oh, not to mention brand new multicolored tiled arches and stained glass ceilings you can still see today. Impressive, huh? If you decide to wander down the tracks, you might be in for a treat. Underground New York is as fascinating as the city above the ground. But one thing we usually take for granted is the behind the scenes of what the Big Apple needs to function. Down here, you might see one or two of New York's pneumatic mail tubes. These tubes were built back in the 1800s and they were operational up until the 1950s. They were responsible for distributing people's mail through different post offices. Letters flew at an impressive speed of 35 miles per hour. That's almost as fast as a professional runner. It sure sounds like a useful system. But I have to say, it feels weird imagining people's correspondence flying around 15 feet underground. Back to street level. We'll wander around fancy Lexington and Park Avenues. If you look up, you'll see the famous Waldorf Astoria 5-star hotel. Many celebrities have stayed there, including John Lennon and Yoko Ono, as well as presidents such as FDR. This is why the hotel used a secret infrastructure to sneak people inside and out. Under the building, a tunnel known as Track 61 connected the Waldorf Astoria to Grand Central Station. The track was deactivated in the late 70s, but some people say Andy Warhol threw a party there in the 80s. I bet that was something. For the next part of our visit, we'll have to take the subway uptown. We'll get off at 125th Street and find ourselves on the scenic waterfront of Riverside Park. Here, you'll find abandoned tracks of an old metro line. If you follow the tracks, you'll get to an underground graffiti gallery, aka the Freedom Tunnel. The tunnel is named after a graffiti artist from the 80s who is commonly known as Freedom. While exploring these tunnels, we'll see over 40 graffiti pieces he painted over 15 years. There are spray paints of James Dean, Mona Lisa, and even a self-portrait of Freedom himself. Moving on, let's wander around the northern part of NYC for a bit. Walking in Van Cortlandt Park will feel like hiking upstate, but believe me, you're still in the city. Along the way, you'll encounter some big ventilation towers made of stone. These towers were once part of an old New York infrastructure. They make up the remains of what used to be the Croton Aqueduct. In the 1800s, the city's water supply flowed through a 41-mile-long underground tunnel, all the way from Croton River in upstate New York to Bryant Park in Midtown Manhattan. Oh yes, and I should probably tell you that Bryant Park wasn't a park. Instead, it hosted a colossal stone structure that looked pretty much like something ancient Egyptians would build. This 4-acre structure served as the city's water reservoir. It even had a pathway on top so that people could enjoy a nice afternoon stroll while looking at the reservoir's crystalline water. Now, all this exploring might have made you hungry, but don't worry, our next stop includes a yummy treat. We'll have to leave Manhattan and make our way to Brooklyn. In case you didn't know, New York City is made of 5 boroughs: Manhattan, Queens, Bronx, Staten Island, and Brooklyn. Crown Heights, that's our stop. Would you believe me if I told you that beneath these streets lie caves full of aging cheese? How very Parisian of them. To get down there, you'll have to make your way through a century-old building that now works as an office space. Maybe wave hello to all those hard-working people and disappear in one of the stairways that will take you 30 feet below the ground. You won't need a flashlight for this one. The caves are bright and renovated and can hold up to 22,000 pounds of cheese. But hey, it might stink. That's the main reason cheesemakers decided to use underground tunnels to age cheese in the first place. After a bite or two of some delicious cheese, let's keep going. While still in Brooklyn, you might see tons of locals enjoying a sunny day in the McCarran Park pool. This pool is a huge attraction, being 3 times the size of an Olympic pool. As the NYC explorer you are becoming, you might even go for a swim. But hey, there's a much more interesting part to this attraction. The pool was built in the early 1900s, but it was shut down in the 50s. During this time, urban explorers discovered a network of underground tunnels right beneath the pool. And, of course, you can find a secret entrance and get a peek for yourself. There, you'll not only see the pool's filtration and heating system, but also a lot of graffiti from the time the site was abandoned. Neat! This question may sound weird, but have you ever seen a cow in New York? I sure haven't. Well, maybe there's a reason for that. Apparently, New York still has underground tunnels that were constructed for the transportation of cattle. Once New York started to flood with automobiles, cows became a burden for traffic. Until a 200-foot-long cow passage was built below 12th Street to transport the livestock that was ferried over from New Jersey. These days, you won't be able to visit this place in person because the tunnel was most likely destroyed. But historians found blueprints proving its existence. To add to the list, archaeologists discovered a very peculiar fossil a while back. Now imagine peeling off the layers of the city's soil. First, at 15 inches, you'll find a layer of wires. I'm talking TV cables, electricity, and all that. Digging deeper, at 4 feet, you'll see water and sewage pipes. But then, at 15 feet down under the surface of NYC, diggers have found a fossilized shipwreck. The wreck is located right under Broad Street, where there was once shallow water. They believe the wreck dates back to the 1600s. It's 92 feet long and 25 feet wide. Oh, and that's not all. At the intersection of Bowery and Canal Street, engineers stumbled upon a room with its walls and ceiling covered in mirrors. And no one has managed to explain the existence of this bizarre place yet. Our Big Apple Underground visit is coming to an end. But we sure did more than just scratch the surface on this one. Before we finish, let's enjoy the best of what NYC cuisine has to offer, a good old bagel. Who knows, maybe next time we'll do Paris or even London. See you soon, explorer.
Ah, the Big Apple at night. New York, New York, the city that never sleeps. How can they? There are way too many lights. But I want to talk about these ones, the red ones. Here's what they look like if you come closer. These red lights are a must, and they're called aircraft warning lights. They're mounted on the top corners of tall buildings to ensure there's no risk that an aircraft will collide with them. The lights are visible for miles around the structure and will signal the passing aircraft that there's a building that they should avoid. Please. The lighting standards are set by the International Civil Aviation Organization and are adopted worldwide. Now they require that all obstacles 148 feet above ground level and taller are marked with warning lights. In close proximity to an airport, even lower buildings can be illuminated too. So, any building, towers, electricity pylons, and chimneys will have these lights for safety. The number of lights and light levels depend on the width and length of the structure. There are also different types of buildings. Some should be lit only at night, some both during the day and night. They can use red or white lights. For buildings that should only be lit at night with red lights, there must be lights at the 148-foot level. Taller buildings should also have lights at the 345-foot level and at 690 feet. Buildings that must be lit both during the day and night with white lights have them with 345, 690, and 1,033 feet. The first skyscraper in the world is the Home Insurance Building located in Chicago. It was built back in 1885. It was a special building constructed using a new method. Buildings used to be supported by masonry walls, which couldn't be very tall because they would be too heavy. The home insurance building had a revolutionary design that allowed it to be higher than other structures. It had an inner skeleton made of steel. The walls around it could be way thinner than usual, and the whole structure could be higher. The home insurance building was a 10-story one, standing at 138 feet tall. Today, it wouldn't even require any aircraft warning lights because it's not even considered that tall. Still, the building started the new construction era. It stood strong until 1931, when, together with several other buildings around it, they took it down to construct something new, the field building that Chicago has now. In 1931, the year the home insurance building was demolished, the Empire State Building was finished. It is 1,250 feet tall, like 10 home insurance buildings on top of one another. That's the construction progress humanity achieved in just 46 years. The Empire State Building became the tallest one in the world. Now, long surpassed, it's the skyscraper that held the record for the longest time, for 39 years to be exact. In 1970, the World Trade Center became the highest one, although it was just 100 feet taller. Now, a bit more than a half a century later, the Empire State Building is ranked 53rd on the list of the tallest buildings. Humanity climbed way higher. Now, the world champ is Burj Khalifa, located in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. The building was finished in 2010. It's 2,717 feet tall, more than 2 Empire State Buildings on top of one another. Skyscrapers are often made of glass for several reasons. First of all, they can press glass in every shape possible. So, the skyscraper can no longer just be a plain boring tower as before. They can design it in any fancy shape as they do around the world. Second, the glass is thin. There's no need for thicker walls like pre-home insurance building times. The walls are thinner, and the floors are bigger, providing more inner space. Glass is also pretty light and allows to make the building very high. Transparent glass reduces the need for electrical lighting inside the building, so it's also very cost-effective. Even more, glass is temperature and weather resistant. And finally, it just looks posh, fancy, and modern. Compare this and that. The latter definitely looks more futuristic and cutting edge. Skyscrapers started out in the United States, but became very popular in Asia, which now has over 7,500 skyscrapers. A skyscraper is now a construction that is 492 feet tall and higher. 9 out of 10 tallest buildings in the world are located in Asia. The country with the most skyscrapers is China, with more than 3,000 of them. Asia has the largest population in the world, and its economy is booming. So, growing high happened to be a perfect solution to fit the most people in its cities. The second most skyscraper-populated continent is North America, with more than 1,000 skyscrapers. New York alone has more skyscrapers than all of Europe combined. And here comes my next question. Why doesn't Europe build skyscrapers? There are just 250 of them there, and half of them are located in just 3 cities: Moscow in Russia, Istanbul in Turkey, and London, the UK. Let's go back to the beginning, and that is the end of the 19th century when skyscrapers' history starts. The first skyscrapers were built in the United States. As an independent country, the United States of America was just 1 century old back then. They built cities from scratch. There was a lot of available land. People could build a house here, and also over there. By that time, Europe had been growing for a while already. The history of Paris dates back to 259 BCE. It wasn't 1 century old, but 20 centuries old. German Cologne was founded in 38 BCE. Rome, Italy's capital city, dates back to 753 BCE, so it was 26 centuries old back then. By the end of the 19th century, Europe had been pretty much built. There was not much extra room for construction, and no one wanted to take down the Colosseum and put up some fancy skyscraper instead. This is history, and Europe likes to preserve history. There was no practical reason for changing things. The driving force of Asian and American skyscrapers was the booming city population and especially rapid urban development of city centers. As people were moving to the city from the suburbs, they needed more floors to accommodate more people on a limited territory. In Europe, despite the population growth and city migration, there was still enough room for everyone. The Europeans are very protective of their city skylines. One interesting story of Brusselization takes us to Brussels, the capital of Belgium. In the 1960s, there were no zoning regulations, and some buildings in Brussels were demolished to make room for more modern ones to develop business districts. Uncontrollable construction started, and modern buildings were built in random places around Brussels. They had no cultural or historical value, and they didn't fit in the city's architecture at all, messing up the city's image. Many architects and other people protested, and new laws were introduced, restricting the demolition of buildings of historical importance and taking construction under control. Other European countries learned from Belgium's mistakes. People across Europe still dislike modern structures. Many cities adopted zoning regulations, and building a fancy glass skyscraper in Europe isn't that easy. Still, cities with big financial centers, like London, Moscow, Frankfurt, or Istanbul, require commercial space. So, in some cities, there are several skyscrapers somewhere outside the historic center, forming separate skyscraper districts. And then there's Rome. It rejects any skyscrapers completely, stating there will never be a high-rise there. Some other Italian cities follow in its footsteps, willing to preserve their historical image. But there's more to it. It's not just people and cultural preservation. Building a skyscraper in Europe isn't as easy as in North America for engineering reasons as well. For example, Berlin, the capital of Germany, is built on muddy ground going down about 260 feet. That's the height of a 20-story building. Without firm ground, a tall building can't stand on the surface safely. Hey, ever played Jenga? Yep, it's kind of the same, only in real life. Building something really tall requires a lot of groundwork. Plus, it can be risky. That's another reason for the lack of skyscrapers, in addition to the attempts to preserve history. And now, let's play. I'll show you several city skylines, and your task is to guess which city it is. Off we go. Here's the first one. Very easy. What do you say? Of course, this is New York. How about this one? It's Hong Kong, China. This is the city with the largest number of skyscrapers in the world. It has 517 skyscrapers, twice more than all of Europe. Okay, let's move on. What city is this? This is Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. By the way, this is what the city looked like in 1990, before they found oil. Yep, it's the same city, and yes, it's just a 30-year difference. Can you recognize this one? It's good old Chicago, the Toddlin' town. What's next? It's Frankfurt, Germany. Okay, a couple more. You can make it. That's Istanbul, Turkey. And the last one for you, it's easier. I'm sure you'll recognize it. Yes, that's Melbourne, Australia. G'day, mate.
Imagine this. When you're wandering around London, you're actually walking over hundreds of miles of tunnels, passageways, and abandoned subway stations. Yeah, there's a whole world down there, underground. What's actually hidden there? Let's try to find out. We didn't even know about this giant network of underground tunnels and passages until recently. People could only guess that there was something underground. It wasn't until 1980 that journalist Duncan Campbell managed to sneak into this underground world. He was able to find a small portal there. Campbell only had a bicycle, a flashlight, and a camera. Together with his friends, he later called the Moles, he went to explore the mysterious undercity of London. And what they saw was astonishing. A giant, complex system. Ghost subway stations, post channels, secret tunnels, and much more. A city under a city. What's more interesting, no one truly knows what really is there. The history of this underground network is so great that nobody actually has its full map. But today, we're going to take a look at some places we know about. The first type is secret passageways. This includes all shelters and tunnels between famous buildings. For example, the passages leading from Buckingham and Westminster palaces. There are also more than 30 bunkers and tunnels scattered throughout the city. Each of these bunkers can accommodate hundreds of people. Many of these passages were created in the 20th century or even earlier. There are also those that date back to the times of the Industrial Revolution. They're all very old and honestly look truly creepy. The second type is postal passages. We know that the underground network is full of them. Unfortunately, we aren't sure about their exact locations. The most famous postal passage is the Postmaster General's secret tunnel. It's right in the heart of London. This passage was created in the middle of the 20th century to transport particularly important messages. This large tunnel stretches all the way to the working East End, breaking up into a network of small passages. And finally, the subway and its abandoned stations. Did you know that the first subway in the world appeared in London? The city's subway system is quite large right now, but there were actually even more stations before. Deep beneath the feet of London's residents lies a network of abandoned tube stations. Almost all of them have remained untouched since the last passenger left their platforms decades ago. There are more than 40 abandoned stations in the city. Let's talk about the most interesting and mysterious ones. London's Tube. This is a river tunnel which served as a test version for the engineers who built the first subway. It's located near the Tower of London. Once, it connected the northern and southern parts of the river. Now, these are just the remnants of the long-lost system. Only this small, round building recalls the times when people used it to get across the river. In the Victorian era, the population of London experienced a big boom. Of course, the authorities needed to do something about this. It took a few decades to fill the city with tons of bridges, different means of transport, and trains. And then, engineer Peter Barlow came up with the idea of creating a whole network of tunnels that would transport people under the city. At first, people were terrified. So much money for such a crazy idea. But we already know the end of this story. The construction of the tunnel was completed in less than a year, and in February 1870 it carried its first passengers. After a lot of criticism, fear, and improvements, in the end, the first full-fledged subway station was created. It closed around 150 years ago. The fate of the station was sealed when they built Tower Bridge right next to it, which sounds better, a walk in the fresh air over the bridge, or a paid trip through a dark, cramped tunnel. Of course, the Tower subway had to be closed down. Down Street Station was closed just 25 years after its opening. First of all, there were other, more convenient stations nearby. And secondly, the locals were rich and could afford more expensive means of transport. However, Down Street wasn't out of service for long. It came in handy again in 1939. The platform was bricked up, and the station was secretly transformed into the headquarters of the Executive Committee of the railway. Since many railroad tracks were damaged, this committee organized all underground movements. The committee hosted Winston Churchill himself, and a little later, they even built the rooms there for the cabinet ministers. Churchill affectionately called this place a barn, but since then, Down Street hasn't been used anymore. It's still empty to this very day, and the station has, to put it mildly, a creepy look. Aldwych. This station has a ridiculous backstory. Despite the fact that it was basically useless, it somehow lasted for about 80 years, and people almost never went there because there were more convenient alternatives nearby. But it's actually a good thing that they didn't close it for so long. Thanks to this, Aldwych Station saved the most valuable treasures of England. Here, people once hid the most precious works of art and relics. For example, the world-famous Elgin marbles. In the 60s, the station started working only during rush hours on weekdays, and in 1994, it was mercifully spared from suffering, simply because they didn't want to spend extra money to replace the elevators here. Now, this station is often used for filming many famous British TV series. You can also check it out during the tour of Hidden London. Clapham South. Yes, technically it's not an abandoned station, but few people know that once it served as living quarters for new arrivals to Britain. There were beds and wash basins for them, It was quite noisy as people heard passing trains all the time, so it couldn't be called the most comfortable accommodation. Those who stayed there paid 6 shillings 6 pence a day, which is equivalent to 33 pence today. They still haven't taken down the signs for medical aid points and an improvised canteen. You can still see them during the tour to this station. Brompton Road. The Piccadilly line is downright full of abandoned tube stations. This station suffered the same fate as Down Street. It was simply too close to its neighbors and was doomed to be deserted from the very beginning. In 1926, the authorities closed Brompton Road for 5 months, and less than 10 years after this, they closed it completely. In the middle of the 20th century, this station started to be used again, just like Down Street. During times of emergency, this place could serve as an underground bunker with the command post on the upper floors and the elevators turning into operating rooms. This station is a relic. These tunnels have witnessed important events in British history. York Road. The Piccadilly line again. What a lucky line! York Road closed in 1932, on the same day that the section of the line from Finsbury Park to Arnos Grove opened. The number of passengers plummeted, and for about a couple of years, there was a debate about whether to leave the station open. As a result, it was decided to close it. It's a pity because the station was truly beautiful. Just look at these wonderful oxblood tiles. Even now, York Road has a rather pleasant appearance. But there's still a chance that one day we'll see the rebirth of York Road. This city area is currently under reconstruction. If more people settled there, the station could be reopened again. What a great world of underground London. Who could have known that they have a whole web of structures below that hold so much history? It's a pity that the passages are closed. It would be very interesting to see all of this, but also pretty scary.